The unexpected reward. The harsh buzzing of the military communicator rang in the soldier's ears. It was a signal that his tour of duty was finally over. The war had been long and brutal, but after years of fighting on the front lines of the intergalactic conflict, it was finally time for him to go home. He had seen things, terrible, unimaginable things. He thought about the people he had lost, the lives he had saved, and the endless hours of training and combat. But now, the war was over, and it was time for him to return to a life of peace, or so he hoped. A message came through, interrupting his thoughts. "Congratulations, soldier. You've earned your reward. Report to the reward chamber immediately." The soldier's heart skipped a beat. A reward. After all the chaos, the endless fighting, and the scars, he had earned something. Something for himself. What would it be? A small, alien pet perhaps. Something to keep him company while he adjusted to life as a civilian. It could be anything. He imagined a furry creature, something small and harmless that would curl up next to him as he relaxed. He made his way to the chamber, the metallic walls of the ship feeling cold and uninviting. The closer he got, the more his excitement grew. He had no idea what was waiting for him, but it didn't matter. It was a reward, something for his service, his sacrifices. As he stepped into the room, he found a large metal table in the center. On it was a small, hovering device, casting a soft blue light. The soldier looked around. No one was there to greet him. It was eerily silent. But as he walked closer, he noticed something that made his breath catch in his throat. Lying on the table, with glowing eyes and skin that shimmered faintly, was not a pet. It wasn't anything he expected. The figure before him was a girl, a beautiful alien girl. Her skin was a soft shade of violet. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural, otherworldly light. She looked fragile, yet there was a strange, almost dangerous air about her. Her long hair floated in the air, as though it defied gravity, and her delicate features seemed to hold an ancient wisdom. The soldier froze, unable to process what he was seeing. This was not a pet. This was no ordinary companion. His heart raced, and a flood of questions filled his mind. Who was she? Why was she here? Why had they given her to him? The alien girl's eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, he felt as though she was looking into his very soul. She didn't speak, but her presence was overwhelming. The soldier's hand instinctively reached for his communicator, but before he could speak, the door to the chamber slammed shut behind him with a loud thud. The room was now sealed, and he was alone with her. The weight of the moment settled on his shoulders. He had no idea what this girl was, but one thing was certain: his life was about to change forever. Suddenly, the girl's lips parted, and she uttered a single word, her voice soft, yet clear. "Help." And just like that, everything he thought he knew about his reward, his future, and even his place in this war-torn galaxy began to crumble. The adventure he was about to embark on was far from what he had imagined. Who was she? And what did she need help with? The questions were racing in his mind, but the answers were far from clear. The soldier didn't know it yet, but his life would never be the same again. The mystery deepens. The soldier stood frozen, staring at the alien girl who had spoken that one word: help. The silence in the chamber seemed to stretch on forever, the hum of the ship's systems, the only sound filling the air. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. He looked at her carefully. Her glowing eyes watched him, full of something he couldn't place. Fear, trust. The uncertainty made his heart race even faster. What was she? Why was she here? And why had they sent her to him? He took a cautious step toward her. The girl didn't move, only watched him intently. He wondered if she could speak more, but before he could say anything, she extended her hand toward him. It was trembling, but there was an urgency in her movement. "Are you asking for help?" the soldier finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. She nodded once, slowly. Her fingers twitched, and for a brief moment, the soldier saw a glimmer of something he hadn't expected: a power. Her hand started to glow with the same strange energy that radiated from her eyes. He stepped back, instinctively raising his hands as if to protect himself. "Wah, what is this?" he stammered, completely stunned. Without saying another word, the girl raised her hand again, but this time she wasn't aiming at him. A large metallic door behind her shuddered, and with a soft, unearthly hum, it began to open, revealing a hidden compartment. The soldier's eyes widened. He knew this ship well. There were no hidden compartments on board. But somehow, this girl, this alien, had just made one appear as if by magic. She could manipulate the very walls around them. The girl lowered her hand, and the glow around her slowly faded. She seemed exhausted, but there was a fierce determination in her expression. "What are you?" the soldier whispered to himself. The girl made a subtle motion with her hand toward the compartment. He stepped forward and peeked inside. To his shock, it wasn't empty. It was filled with various tools and strange artifacts. Alien technology, things he had never seen before. And then there was a small device at the very back of the compartment. The soldier instinctively reached for it, sensing that it might be important. The moment his fingers brushed against the cold surface, a deep mechanical voice echoed in his mind, making him freeze in place. "Subject located. Initiating retrieval. Prepare for transport." The soldier jerked back, dropping the device. What was that voice, and why had it spoken to him directly? His breath quickened. He looked at the girl. Her eyes were wide with fear now. She was looking at the compartment, clearly afraid. "What was that?" he asked urgently. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand once more, this time toward the ceiling. The strange glow returned, and the ship around them seemed to shift, the walls creaking and groaning as if in response to her power. The soldier's heart pounded. He had never seen anything like this. Then, as quickly as it started, the glow faded again. The girl collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. The soldier rushed to her, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and an unspoken mourning. Her lips parted as if she were about to speak, but no words came. Instead, she pointed toward the door, her gaze intense. The soldier followed her silent command, looking back at the door he had entered through. The lights in the hallway flickered, and distant voices could be heard echoing in the corridors. The military was coming. They would be here soon. She was right. He couldn't stay here. He helped her to her feet, his mind racing. Who was she? What was this strange device? And why did the military want to retrieve her? As they hurried toward the door, the soldier's heart weighed heavy with uncertainty. He had no idea what he was getting into, but one thing was clear. His reward wasn't a simple companion. The girl was something far more dangerous and far more important. The soldier glanced at her one last time before they made their escape. The uncertainty in her eyes matched his own. The real danger was only just beginning. A secret revealed. The soldier hurried down the narrow corridor, glancing back at the alien girl who struggled to keep up. Her breath was shallow, her movements slow, as if the brief burst of power she had used to open the hidden compartment had drained her. The soldier's mind raced with questions, but he couldn't afford to dwell on them. Not yet. They reached a junction where two hallways split off, each leading to a different part of the ship. The soldier hesitated, looking both ways, before deciding to take the hallway that led toward the lower decks. He had an old safe house down there, a place to hide out for a while. "Come on," he urged, offering his hand to the girl. She took it, her touch warm but surprisingly firm. As they hurried forward, the soldier's mind kept circling back to the mysterious words he had heard earlier, the voice in his head. Subject located. Initiating retrieval. Prepare for transport. It was clearly meant for her. But who had sent it? And why had they left the girl alone on the ship in the first place? The answer came quicker than expected. They reached the safe house, a small windowless room near the ship's engine room, a place few would think to search. As the soldier sealed the door behind them, he turned to the girl, his heart still pounding from the rush of their escape. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Who are you? Why are they after you?" The alien girl slumped against the wall, clearly exhausted. Her eyes fluttered as she tried to regain some strength. But after a long moment, she finally spoke, softly, with a voice that was both beautiful and haunting. "My name is Illyria," she said, her voice trembling. "I am of the Assyrian race. My people, we were once the leaders of the galaxy. We ruled over planets, controlled the stars. But we became too powerful, too proud. Others feared us, and they betrayed us." The soldier leaned in, his curiosity piqued. The Assyrians. He had heard of them before. They were a myth, a legend told in hushed whispers, a species of incredible power, capable of controlling energy itself. "They betrayed you?" the soldier asked, not fully understanding. "How? Why?" Illyria's glowing eyes met his, and for a moment, the soldier saw an ancient sadness in them. She looked away, closing her eyes as though recalling a painful memory. "We were hunted," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Betrayed by the very ones we trusted. They destroyed our planet, scattered us across the galaxy. Many of us were captured, imprisoned, experimented on. My people were turned into weapons, tools for others to use. I was one of the few who escaped." The soldier's stomach twisted. This was worse than he imagined. The girl in front of him, Illyria, was a survivor of a genocide. Her people were wiped out by those they had once trusted. And now some powerful group, was after her. "But why did they send you to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Illyria's gaze hardened, and she stepped closer to the soldier, her expression fierce. "You don't understand," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "You're not just a soldier anymore. You were chosen. They sent me to you because you're part of something bigger, something much bigger than this war. The people who destroyed my race, they're still out there. They're coming for you, for me, for all of us." The soldier's heart raced again. He was part of something bigger. But what could he possibly have to do with all of this? Illyria reached out, touching his arm gently. "You've fought in the war, yes. You've seen the way things are going. The universe is collapsing, piece by piece. The people who destroyed my world are the same ones who have been causing unrest across the galaxy. They'd been hiding in the shadows, controlling everything from behind the scenes. They control the wars, the leaders, even the military." The soldier's mind reeled. This couldn't be true. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He had always felt like something was off. Like the wars had been orchestrated. Like the fights were never truly about freedom or justice. But now, as he looked at Illyria, he understood. She wasn't just some alien girl. She was the last hope of her people. She carried the knowledge of her race's downfall and the key to stopping the unseen enemy that threatened the galaxy. "They're coming," Illyria said softly, her voice shaking with fear. "We don't have much time." The soldier swallowed hard. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into, but he knew one thing for certain now. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Escape and pursuit. The soldier's mind buzzed with information, but there was no time to process it. Illyria's words echoed in his head as they prepared to flee from the only place that had been a temporary haven. The Assyrian race, destroyed by those who now controlled the galaxy. The very people who had been manipulating wars and conflicts for their own gain. It was a dark revelation, but it also brought clarity. His life, once dedicated to the battlefield, was now part of something much larger, something dangerous. The soldier looked at Illyria, her tired eyes still glowing faintly, her strength now beginning to fade. He needed to get her somewhere safe. But where? A loud thud at the door made him jump, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster holstered at his side. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of boots stomping down the hallway, heavy, mechanical, and methodical. The military was closing in. They knew he had Illyria. They knew she was a threat. "Illyria," the soldier whispered urgently, "we have to go. Now." Illyria nodded weakly but with determination. "They will find us. They always do." The soldier grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back of the safe house, where an emergency escape hatch lay hidden beneath the floor. He had used it before, during missions when things went south. It was their only way out now. As they reached the hatch, he glanced back one last time at the room. It felt like a lifetime ago that he had stepped into this chamber, thinking it was a place of safety. Now it was nothing more than a temporary hiding spot, a place that would soon be filled with enemies. The hatch clicked open with a low hum. The soldier gestured for Illyria to go first, and she hesitated only for a moment before crawling through. He followed, closing the hatch behind them, and they slipped into the narrow maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the ship. The tunnels were cramped, and the low hum of machinery echoed around them. But it was their only chance to avoid the search parties. They crawled in silence for what felt like hours, their bodies pressed tightly against the walls. The soldier kept one hand on his weapon, his eyes scanning the dark passageways for any sign of danger. Illyria's presence beside him was like a weight, a constant reminder of the threat they were facing. Eventually, they reached a small maintenance room that connected to the lower levels of the ship. It was a dead end, but it offered a moment of respite. The soldier helped Illyria to her feet, her skin pale from exhaustion. He could see how drained she was. The toll her powers had taken on her was obvious. He didn't know how long she could keep going. "We need to get to the shuttle bay," he said, his voice low. "If we can make it there, we can get off this ship." Illyria nodded weakly, but didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The fear in her eyes told him everything. The military wouldn't let them leave that easily. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder and closer. The soldier's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at Illyria, silently signaling for her to stay quiet. He crouched, his back pressed against the wall, and peered out from behind a corner. The soldiers were getting closer. He counted 3 men, all armed with blasters, their helmets covering their faces. They were the Special Ops Unit, the ones who were trained to track and capture high-value targets. And right now, Illyria was their target. The soldier's pulse raced. He knew they couldn't fight their way out of this one, not without backup, and not with Illyria so weak. They had to run. He turned back to Illyria and motioned for her to follow him. They moved quickly through the corridors, using the shadows to their advantage. The soldier's mind was working overtime, calculating their options as they darted from one hiding spot to the next. Just as they reached the main hallway leading to the shuttle bay, a loud voice called out from behind them. "Stop! You're surrounded. Surrender now." The soldier cursed under his breath. They had no choice now. There was no turning back. "Go," the soldier said, pushing Illyria toward the shuttle bay entrance. "I'll cover you." Illyria hesitated for a moment, her eyes meeting his. "You can't hold them off forever," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but you can't get caught." With a final, desperate look, Illyria sprinted toward the shuttle bay doors. The soldier turned, drawing his blaster as the soldiers closed in on him. His fingers tightened around the weapon. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to make this worse. But he had no choice. Not anymore. He fired a warning shot into the air, hoping it would delay them just long enough. The soldiers ducked behind cover, returning fire. The soldier fired again, hitting one of them square in the chest. He dropped to the floor, his blaster skittering across the floor. The remaining 2 soldiers advanced, but the soldier had already made his move. He turned, running toward the shuttle bay, but as he reached the door, it slammed shut with a loud hiss. Illyria was already inside, the ship's engines powering up. "Come on," she screamed from the inside, her hand pressing against the glass. The soldier reached the door, pounding on it with his fists, but it was too late. The ship's doors sealed tight. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him. "Going somewhere." The soldier spun around, raising his blaster as the last soldier from the team emerged from the shadows. He was grinning, a smug look on his face. "You're not going anywhere, soldier." The soldier raised his weapon, knowing he had one last chance. But Illyria's voice echoed in his mind, stronger than ever. "Don't worry. We're not done yet." And then, just as the soldier prepared to make his final stand, the entire corridor exploded in a flash of blinding light. The chase was far from over. But somehow, they had escaped. For now. Unlikely allies. The world around the soldier seemed to spin as the explosion echoed in the corridor. The sudden blast sent him tumbling, slamming into the wall with a force that knocked the wind out of him. He struggled to stay conscious, his vision blurring, the ringing in his ears drowning out everything except his own heartbeat. His hand instinctively went for his blaster, but as he pulled himself to his feet, a shadow appeared in front of him. "Hold on," a voice said urgently, catching him before he could fall again. He looked up to see a figure standing before him. Tall, with short cropped hair and a rugged, worn look. It was an old comrade, someone the soldier hadn't seen in years. Eric, a former soldier in his unit, one who had disappeared after the war and was presumed dead. But now, here he was, standing right in front of him. You're alive." The soldier gasped, disbelief flooding his mind. Eric nodded, his face grim. "Barely. But right now, we need to get moving. The ship's about to be compromised, and I've got a ship waiting." The soldier didn't have time to process Eric's sudden appearance. The explosion had left the entire ship in chaos, alarms blaring and lights flashing. The military had likely mobilized everything they had to track down Illyria. There wasn't much time. Eric grabbed him by the arm, pulling him toward a side corridor. "Come on. I don't know how much longer the shuttle can stay hidden." The soldier stumbled, but Eric's grip was firm, pulling him along as they rushed through the ship's lower levels. As they ran, the soldier's mind raced. He had known Eric well. He was a tough, no-nonsense soldier, one of the best. But why was he here? What had happened to him? How had he survived? "You've got a lot of explaining to do," the soldier said as they rounded another corner. "But right now, I'll settle for a way out." "I'll explain everything when we're safe," Eric replied, his voice low and urgent. "You've got bigger problems. You're not the only one they're after. And that girl, Illyria, she's a key player in this." The soldier's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, key player? What's really going on here?" Eric hesitated for a moment, looking over his shoulder as if checking to make sure no one was following. "It's bigger than just a fight between races, soldier. This is about power." The Assyrians were more than just a race. They were a force, a weapon, capable of shaping the future of the galaxy itself. And Illyria, she's one of the last of her kind. The people who want her aren't just after her life. They want her abilities. They want to control her. The soldier's mind reeled. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. "Then why help us?" the soldier asked, suddenly suspicious. "Why come out of hiding and risk your life for us?" Eric shot him a hard look. "Because I've seen what happens when they get their way. They're not just some military faction. They've got their hands in everything. They control the leaders, the banks, the technology. They've been orchestrating wars for years to destabilize everything and take over." The soldier's blood ran cold. It was everything Illyria had hinted at, and more. These people weren't just rogue forces. They were part of a massive, shadowy organization that had been pulling the strings of the galaxy for far too long. Eric's voice dropped to a whisper. "They know about you now. They'll come for you. And when they do, they won't stop until they get you both." Before the soldier could respond, they reached a hidden access panel. Eric punched in a code, and a secret door slid open, revealing a small, well-hidden hangar. Inside, a sleek, black shuttle stood waiting, its engines humming softly. "Get in," Eric ordered. "We've got to get off this ship before they lock it down completely." The soldier didn't need any further convincing. They ran to the shuttle, Eric securing the door behind them as the ship's engines roared to life. Illyria was already inside, sitting in the pilot's seat, her face pale but determined. Her glowing eyes flickered as she adjusted the controls, her hands shaking slightly. "You found him," Illyria said quietly, her voice soft but full of relief. "I knew you would." The soldier nodded, taking a seat beside her. His mind was still spinning, trying to make sense of everything he'd just learned. "You were right about everything. And now we've got people after us. Big people. The kind who don't stop until they get what they want." Illyria's gaze darkened as she looked out the window at the approaching starfield. "They will keep coming," she said, her voice heavy with an ancient sorrow. "But we can't stop. Not now." The soldier looked at Eric, who was securing their weapons and preparing the shuttle for takeoff. "Where are we going?" the soldier asked. Eric's eyes met his, filled with a seriousness that made the soldier's stomach tighten. "We're going to find the resistance. They're the only ones who can help us now. They've been fighting these people for years, and they're the only ones with the power to take them down." Illyria turned to the soldier, her eyes filled with resolve. "I didn't come this far just to be a weapon for others to use. I came to end this, to free my people, and stop the chaos they've created." The soldier's heart pounded as the shuttle lifted off, racing toward the unknown. He had no idea where this path would lead them, but one thing was certain: they were no longer just running from their enemies. They were about to fight back. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and their enemies were powerful. But for the first time in a long while, the soldier felt something else: hope. The final confrontation. The shuttle roared through the stars, leaving behind the ship they had narrowly escaped and heading toward an unknown destination. Illyria piloted them through the void, her eyes constantly flicking between the controls and the darkness outside. The soldier sat beside her, his mind still reeling from the revelations. The resistance, who were they? And could they really help them bring down the shadowy organization that had been manipulating the galaxy? Eric, seated in the rear of the shuttle, was busy with a communications panel, trying to make contact with anyone who could help them. His face was tense, his jaw clenched in concentration. Illyria had told them about the Resistance's base, a hidden world far from the reach of the organization. But getting there wasn't going to be easy. The galaxy was full of dangers, and the farther they went, the more they would be hunted. After a few moments, Eric turned around, his face grim. "They're looking for us. They've already scrambled every ship in the sector. We don't have much time." The soldier glanced at Illyria, his mind racing. "How far is the Resistance base?" Illyria didn't answer immediately. Her fingers danced over the controls, inputting a series of coordinates. She was concentrating hard, the strain of everything weighing heavily on her. Finally, she spoke. "It's far, but I can get us there. It'll take time, though. Time we don't have. And the closer we get, the more dangerous it'll be. Then we make our stand," the soldier said firmly, his hand tightening around the grip of his blaster. "We fight." Illyria looked at him, her eyes filled with determination, though there was also a flicker of uncertainty. "You're not ready for this. They won't stop, and they're stronger than you think." "We don't have a choice," the soldier replied, his voice resolute. "We can't run forever. We fight, or we die trying." The shuttle sped through the void, but the soldier knew that they were being tracked. They had barely made it away from the military's clutches, but now the real challenge was ahead of them. The shadowy organization was vast, and their reach extended to the furthest corners of the galaxy. If they were going to stop them, they needed help. They needed the Resistance. Just as the shuttle jumped into a higher speed, a flash of red light appeared in the distance. A warning sign blared on the control panel, and Illyria's expression hardened. "We've been followed," she muttered. The soldier turned to see the shadow of a large ship emerging from behind a nearby moon. It was a battle cruiser, an enormous, heavily armed vessel. The logo on its side was unmistakable. This was one of the organization's ships, a ship that meant business. "We're not getting away from this one," Eric said, his voice grim. "They'd caught up with us." The soldier stood up, his pulse quickening. "Can we outrun them?" Illyria shook her head. "Not unless you want to sacrifice the ship. They'll catch us eventually." "Then we fight," the soldier repeated, his voice steely. "Get us into a defensive position." Illyria looked at him, hesitating for only a moment before she nodded. She pushed the shuttle into a dive, making a sharp turn to avoid a direct hit from the cruiser's weapons. The ship shook as the first volley of fire whizzed past them. The soldier's heart raced as he strapped in, grabbing his weapon. Eric pulled out his own weapon and began preparing the shuttle's defensive systems. "This is going to be a long shot. We need to disable their tracking system, or we're dead." "Then we disable it," the soldier said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "What do we need to do?" "We have to get on board their ship," Eric replied. "We need to plant a disruptor on their main system. If we do that, their entire ship will be blind. Then we can escape." "How do we get on board?" the soldier asked, narrowing his eyes. Eric grinned. "We take a shuttle. That's how." Before the soldier could respond, Illyria's voice cut through the tension. "They're getting closer. We'll have to make a boarding maneuver." The shuttle jolted again, and the lights flickered. The battle cruiser was closing in, its massive cannons locking onto their position. They were in danger of being shot down at any moment. Illyria's hands were steady on the controls, but even she knew there was little time. "We have one shot," Illyria said, her voice low and steady. "I can take us in close enough to board. But it'll be risky." "Risky is the only option we have," the soldier said. "Let's do it." With a deep breath, Illyria navigated the shuttle, making an insane dive toward the cruiser's hull. The distance between them closed quickly, and the soldier could hear the sound of the ship's cannons charging up. "Now," Eric shouted, and the soldier wasted no time. He grabbed a magnetic grappling hook and fired it toward the enemy ship. The hook connected with a loud clang. The soldier was the first to leap from the shuttle, using the hook to swing toward the battle cruiser. Illyria and Eric followed closely behind. The metal of the cruiser's hull was cold beneath the soldier's hands, his boots making a slight scrape against the surface as he moved toward the entrance. They had to get inside. Now. The soldier reached the airlock first, using a plasma cutter to slice through the door. Sparks flew as the thick metal melted away, creating a gap just big enough for them to slip inside. The alarms began blaring as they entered the cruiser's interior, the sound deafening in the tight space. "We're in," the soldier muttered, his voice filled with determination. "Now let's find their control room." They made their way through the corridors, their movements quick but cautious. The sounds of soldiers patrolling echoed nearby. But the soldier knew that time was running out. They had to plant the disruptor before they were discovered. Then they found it. The control room. It was heavily guarded. Armed soldiers stood watch by the door, their weapons ready. But they hadn't expected a small team of highly trained operatives to breach their ship so quickly. With swift and silent movements, the soldier and his team took down the guards, their weapons firing with precision. They planted the disruptor on the main console and set the timer. "Let's get out of here," Eric yelled. The countdown had begun. They had seconds before the system went dark, and the entire ship was thrown into chaos. As they sprinted toward the exit, the soldier glanced back at Illyria, who was leading the charge, her glowing eyes flickering with energy. This was the moment. The resistance was their final hope, and they had just taken the first step toward bringing down the organization that had torn the galaxy apart. But even as they escaped, the soldier knew this was only the beginning. The real fight had only just begun. The victory and a new beginning. The shuttle hurtled through space, the distant stars streaking past them, as the chaos of the battle cruiser slowly faded into the background. The countdown timer on the disruptor had been close, too close, but they had made it. The battle cruiser was blind, its systems shut down, and with it, the threat of being tracked had dissipated for now. Inside the shuttle, the soldier sat back against the seat, his chest rising and falling with each breath. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, but the weight of what they had done hung over him. They had just struck a massive blow to the organization that had been pulling the strings of the galaxy for decades. But the war wasn't over. They had only just begun to fight back. Illyria sat at the controls, her hand steady despite the exhaustion written all over her face. Her glowing eyes were dim now, but there was a quiet strength in her gaze. She had led them to the heart of the enemy ship, and they had succeeded. But even she knew this was just a small victory in a much larger war. Eric, who had been silently monitoring their trajectory, turned around and gave the soldier a nod. "We made it. We're safe, for now." The soldier nodded, but his thoughts were already on the next step. "We'll need more than just one victory. We need to find the rest of the resistance. We need to unite the galaxy against them." Illyria's eyes flicked toward him, her expression serious. "That's the plan. The resistance won't be easy to find. They've been scattered, hiding for years. But with what we've just done, we've shown them that we can strike back." The soldier knew she was right. The resistance had to be out there, and they had to be ready to fight. They were the galaxy's last hope against an enemy that controlled the stars from the shadows. As the shuttle made its way toward the hidden world, where the resistance base was located, the soldier couldn't help but think about the people he had fought for. The innocent civilians caught in the middle of a war they didn't understand. The galaxy had been on the brink of destruction for far too long, and now it was time for those who wanted to save it to rise up. "We can do this," the soldier said, his voice steady. "We can bring the fight to them." Eric chuckled, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the soldier. "You've got that right. We've just begun to make a dent. The real battle is ahead of us." The soldier smiled faintly. "And we'll be ready." As they entered the atmosphere of the hidden planet, the shuttle descended toward a small hidden base. It was an isolated place, tucked away from the prying eyes of the galaxy's most powerful factions. It was here that the last remnants of the resistance had gathered, waiting for a leader, someone who would fight for freedom, for the future of the galaxy. The shuttle landed softly on the makeshift runway, and the soldier stepped out first, his boots hitting the ground with a firm thud. The air was different here, cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the cold metallic corridors of the ships they had just escaped from. Illyria and Eric followed him, and as they approached the entrance to the base, a figure stepped out to greet them. It was an older man, his face lined with age, but his eyes sharp, filled with the same determination that the soldier had seen in Illyria and Eric. He was a leader of the resistance, a person who had survived the organization's attacks and lived to fight another day. "You've done it," the man said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and respect. "You've struck a blow against the enemy. And that means everything." The soldier nodded, but he knew this was just the beginning. "We have a long road ahead of us, but together we can win this." The leader of the resistance smiled, his face lighting up with a glimmer of hope. "Together we will. We've been waiting for this moment, for someone to light the spark. And now we have it." Illyria stepped forward, her voice calm but powerful. "The galaxy is on the brink of destruction, but we have the power to stop it. We have to unite the people and take the fight to those who have been controlling everything from the shadows." The leader's eyes glinted with pride. "You're right. The galaxy may be divided, but we can bring it together. We've been building our forces in secret, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now that moment has arrived." The soldier looked around at the faces of those who had gathered in the resistance base, men and women from every corner of the galaxy, all fighting for the same cause. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. The enemy was vast, their reach nearly infinite. But for the first time in a long while, the soldier felt a sense of purpose. The fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something greater. "It's time to take back the galaxy," the soldier said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "For freedom. For the future." The group stood together, united by a single purpose, and as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting light on the darkened world around them, they knew that this was just the beginning of the end. The battle was far from over, but with every victory, they were one step closer to reclaiming the galaxy from the shadows. And for the first time, the soldier felt the spark of hope, hope that they could truly make a difference. Together, they would fight for the future.